Would you like to be somebody who understands why characters in old novels tend to be more sensitive, empathetic, and have a stronger conscience in comparison to people today in real life? Then listen to this entire video where I explain a few reasons why people nowadays might be less empathetic and have a less strong, active moral compass. So before we get into this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, and how to reduce suffering in life. Let's get into it. So I've been reading some novels lately, and when I read novels that were written and published, centuries ago, or at least a few decades ago, I tend to notice a difference in how sensitive and empathetic the characters seem in these stories in comparison to humans alive nowadays in modern society. Otherwise I tend to only really read self-help books, so I don't really read too many novels. But when I do read them, I feel like the characters are different to humans in real life. Potentially even more human, more real than humans who are actually alive in reality. So perhaps people nowadays just don't communicate how they feel, for example, openly, whereas in these books, you can jump into the mind, into the thoughts of characters, and you don't really get access to that nowadays. In real life in general. But maybe people don't communicate their feelings openly, so that might be a contributing factor. But I also notice within myself that I do not consciously feel the intensity of the emotions that are portrayed, for example, in English literature books, for example. Now, the characters in these old novels seem far more touched by their environment and the situations that occur around them. Like when I read paragraphs about the different characters and how they reflect upon what they have done or what's going on, and they're caught up in their thoughts, it seems like they have a far more sensitive and present conscience, like an ability to judge what is ethical and unethical, what is right and wrong, good or evil. And this moral compass in these figures seems very active. For example, this is not about moral compass, but just the intensity of people's emotions and how they speak. I'm currently reading The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. That was a book published, I believe, in 1880. So it was a little kind of old, relatively. And here's two excerpts from the book. First one is about a mother expressing how she feels about her daughter. So the daughter is Lisa, and she is in a wheelchair. And she had just had fever the last night. The daughter is ill. She's not a child, but she's ill. She's like a young woman, and the mother is, upset and sort of exhausted by her daughter. And the mum says to the daughter, your caprices, Lisa, your fidgetiness, your illness, that awful night of fever, everlasting, everlasting. That's the worst of it. Everything, in fact, everything, even that miracle too. Oh, how it has upset me, how it has shattered me, that miracle. And that tragedy in the drawing room, it's more than I can bear, I warn you, I can't bear it. A comedy perhaps, not a tragedy. Oh my God, what is happening to me? Every minute I close my eyes and see that it's all nonsense, all nonsense. Like, trying to imagine, people don't talk like that nowadays. Like, she's really expressing her deepest passion and how she's feeling and her dissatisfaction with such intensity. Like, people don't do that nowadays. But this feels so human, the way she's communicating with her daughter. And now I have another excerpt from the book, which is between two brothers, and the one brother warns the other brother about something he's going to do, and this is what he says. "Stay, Alexei, one more confession to you alone," cried Dmitri, suddenly turning back. Look at me well. You see here, there's terrible disgrace in store for me." In brackets, as he said here, Dmitri struck his chest with his fist with a strange air, as though the dishonor lay precisely in his chest, and in some spot in a pocket, perhaps, or hanging around his neck. End of bracket. You know me now, a scoundrel, an avowed scoundrel, but let me tell you that I've never done anything before and never shall again anything that can compare to the baseness with the dishonor which I bear now at this very minute on my breast. So the brother is just confessing that he is a scoundrel, and with deep, intense emotion. And again, people don't talk like that today. But this guy is really expressing sort of what is occurring within him from the bottom of his soul up to his brain. Sort of the entirety of himself is expressed in this speech. I mean, the speech goes on, but that was just a part of it. So I think people nowadays speak more with a mundane tone on average. I feel like they're less ecstatic and passionate in their speech, and I think it's because they're less in tune with their real selves. Like, they don't grasp the intensity of their life. Now, of course, I know this book is fiction, but like Jordan Peterson says, for those who don't know Jordan Peterson, he's a clinical psychologist and has written, an author also, and is quite a prominent figure, let's say, in real life. And he says, that these books are fiction, but they might actually be hyper real. They are reflections of how humans act in reality. And these authors have observed humans and created an abstraction of how humans behave on average, and they formulate this abstraction, this behavior, through art, like a novel. So the behavior of the figures is a collation of data on human nature. And it's like a descriptive analysis of human behavior. And so the fact that these figures in these books are so sensitive and so expressive, it struck me as seeming peculiar. It sounded peculiar because it doesn't appear that many humans nowadays in my surroundings or on TV, on YouTube, whatever, have such a present conscience and active moral compass. I mean, maybe they do and they're just not conscious of it, or they simply do not vocalize the existence of their conscience and moral compass. So I think people seem less occupied with the consequences of their actions and the consequences their environment have on their own life. Almost like they're careless or they're emotionally unaffected. In general, I just feel humans often do not experience the consequences of their actions and surroundings with such intensity as the characters in these novels do. So the question arises then, why do people nowadays seem less morally or emotionally affected? So I already said that maybe they simply don't express it, but let's disregard that and just assume they do have these, it's not because they don't express it, it's due to some other reason. Reason number one, I think. People believe they are influenced to a lesser degree by their own actions and the occurrences within their environments as they truly are. I think they underestimate the price that they pay, or one pays, for one's own behavior, and in some sense, people are dumbed down and insensitive. They do not feel or see how interconnected they are with the rest of the world and how their behavior determines the trajectory of humanity. Now, you might reply and think, that's not true. My behavior does not have much influence in the grand scheme of things. That is incorrect, I think. I think Jordan Peterson also said this. No, I know he said it. He said, modern people in Western society know about 1,000 people, across their lifetime. And that means if everybody knows 1,000 people, you are 2 people away from influencing 1 million people and 3 people away from influencing 1 billion. Because if it's 2 people, it's 1,000 people times 1,000 people, because you're talking to one person and then another person, and they each themselves know 1,000 people, and then they know 1,000 people. Or is that how it works? It's like one person they know 1,000, and then another person also knows 1,000, and then it spreads out like that. then it's 1,000 times 1,000, or 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000, which is 1 billion then. So you're really only 2 people away or 3 people away from influencing like an enormous portion of the human population. So don't underestimate your actions. Secondly, the reason why I think people are less emotionally or morally affected is because the conscience of people is less active. And this point is connected to the previous point. People are less afraid of how they will bear the consequences of their actions, or not necessarily less afraid, but or I don't think they're less afraid, but maybe they're actually just attempting to avoid having to face the fact that their actions will severely impact their future selves and the humans around them, their loved ones. Like, it's an attempt to avoid having to take responsibility for one's actions. It's not necessarily irrelevant to people how they behave, but they just don't want to admit that they are determining the lives of the world, or at least of their loved ones. And I can understand that, because it is painful to bear the responsibility for yourself and the people around you. Like, seriously. I mean, when you realize all the mistakes you make and how they influence other people, and you make these mistakes because you are simply a limited human being, and then you can be shocked, because no matter how hard you try to be a noble, virtuous citizen of this world, you will still take suboptimal decisions and harm people around you to a certain extent, no matter how hard you try. It's just a consequence of our composition as limited beings. And I think there is a kind of dissociation that goes on here. If you want to know what dissociation is, I'll link it below. I've made 2 other videos where I explain dissociation in modern people, how their mind and body disconnect and they're not in tune. I think they're disconnected from the human state. Like, modern people in the West can be easily and often disconnected from the human state of being alive and vibrant, sort of being like their natural selves, like an animal almost, not in like a derogatory, demeaning way an animal, but like a wise kind of animal. And they have departed from that, not permanently, but temporarily departed at least from it. Because they do not feel themselves, they do not feel how their body reacts to their environment, not in like whether the sun is out and they get a sunburn, but more of if they're in a conflict, the emotions they feel, the intensity, they don't grasp it, or they're not conscious of it because they're disconnected, they're dissociated, the brain from the body. They're less in tune with their self, with with how their body feels. So in conclusion, these characters depicted in novels are very often deeply thoughtful, self-reflective, express themselves with intense passion and feeling, and they're very expressive. And that seems different to how humans are today. And I think these characters in these books are actually more human than humans nowadays, because the way these authors have portrayed these characters is, it's an abstraction of how it's a relatively accurate abstraction of how human behavior really occurs and what it is. And we nowadays have actually drifted from that to a certain degree. We are less in tune with ourselves. We are dissociated. And this might be because people do not want to bear the responsibility or the realization that their behavior affects the people around them. And that's sort of like a shortcut to having to realize how you are ethically responsible for those people around you. And that's a painful realization and a tough one, and people would prefer not to have to face it. Yeah. So please comment below whether you agree with my opinion, or whether you have also thought of this before when reading novels, that the characters are far more expressive and passionate than humans nowadays sometimes, or for some humans nowadays. Not all, but some. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, Jungian psychology also, and how to reduce suffering in life. Thank you for listening.